I'm Paul Hastings, and you're listening to Compelled, where we use gripping, immersive storytelling to bring to life Christian testimonies from the kingdom of God, told by the people compelled to live for Him. Recently, we heard from Laddie Calloway, a street fighter and drug dealer. After being declared a fatality from a drug shooting, Laddie's life continued to spiral out of control until he remembered the seeds of faith that had been planted by his childhood church. Again, you can hear that story in episode number 96 with Laddie Calloway. Today, our guest is Meriann Sanford. Meriann never felt like she belonged. She tried to make her own way through life and felt that she was a good person, but didn't realize how far from the mark she truly was, or how close God had been every step of the way. So gather around, lean in, and join us for another compelling story from the kingdom of God. I first met Meriann and her family a few years ago when they started attending my church here in Austin, Texas. But I had no idea about her testimony until she shared it at church a couple years later. And finally, I had the chance to invite her into the studio to share it with you, our listeners. Meriann was raised in the 80s, which is when our story begins.
I grew up in Central California for the most part. My dad was technically Catholic. His side of the family, they were traditional Catholic. You get baptized, you go on Christmas Eve, you go on Easter. That's kind of it. I have a couple memories of going to church. We didn't have a Bible at the house. We never talked about faith, at home. It was just kind of what you do to try and live a decent life, but I don't ever remember having the conversations at home after. So it wasn't something that applied to our family values or anything like that. It was just, this is what we do. We go to church because your grandparents said so or something. I'm sure that's where it came from. I did end up doing First Communion. I think I might have been 7 years old when I did First Communion. And it was like an after-school class. Then you go to the church, and all I knew is that meant that then you got to eat the little wafer that they gave you. But again, there was no real understanding even then of who Jesus is.
When Meriann was 7, her parents divorced, and shortly afterwards, her dad was in a terrible plane crash and barely survived. A couple years later, her mom took Meriann and her brother and moved them from California to Florida to live with a new boyfriend she had met online. Although Meriann's dad was severely disabled from the plane crash and couldn't work a job, he also moved across the country so that he could live in the same town as the kids. And it was a good thing that he did so, because almost as soon as Meriann and her brother got to Florida, their mom broke up with her boyfriend and flew straight back to California to move in with yet another love interest. But shockingly, she didn't take the kids with her. Instead, she left them with their disabled dad and never really gave them an explanation for why. But before their mom left, she plugged the children in with a spiritual commune that was within walking distance of their dad's home in Florida. The commune was called Kashi Ranch and was essentially a cult led by a spiritual guru named Ma. Among other things, the ranch taught meditation classes, sold mystical spiritual beads in their gift shop, and promised to help anyone unlock the mysteries of the universe. But more immediately, they agreed to care for Meriann, her brother, and her dad as charity cases.
Kashi Ranch was this religious land that was, maybe 100 acres. It was a good chunk, and there were many people that lived on the ranch. There were houses, there were apartments. They had an outdoor roller hockey rink. They had a little preschool on it. It was its own thing, and there were big signs. And the signs at the front always reminded my brother and I of the Welcome to Jurassic Park signs. To us, it was very dramatic driving into this place. And they ended up, what they would say is helping to take care of my dad and my brother and I. And they let us come and have dinner. They had a big, like a mess hall. It was just like a big cafeteria. And they let us go to dinner there and eat for free. We could go there and eat. But we had to go to the ashram after. We weren't allowed to just eat and then leave. We weren't allowed to live there because we weren't really part of the system. I don't know. So I know we had to live in the neighborhood across the street. They wouldn't let us, and they had a bunch of housing on there. So my brother and I were always like, why won't they just let us live in one of these many apartments? Like, things are so difficult. Why don't they like actually take us in and help us out? And it felt pretty clear that we weren't part of the club fully, but they fed us. And so we got to go to dinner. So most nights we would ride our bikes across this little highway street from the neighborhood we lived to go, and we'd ride through this little jungle path to get to the ashram, and we would have dinner, whatever it was. And then they said, okay, it's 6:45. Everybody has to go to this thing. And so it was, again, Florida, very kind of lush, jungly in these little walking paths. And you would walk through, from the ashram. It was just like walking on a college campus, really. And you would go to the ashram, and it was this big, big room, really dimly lit, incense burning. So it was just like real smoky and thick and crowded with people, but no chairs. Everybody's on pillows on the floor and just chanting, lots of chanting. And so we would come in and we would have to sit down. And it was always this feeling of don't misbehave, don't distract, don't act out, or you can't be here. We're not going to feed you anymore. We're not going to let you come and be part of this. So there was always this, we didn't really want to go to the ashram thing. And I think we tried to get out of it a few times, but my dad's like, we're going to get the food. It was often, we went a lot of times. And at other times in the year and a half we were there, they had like a Christmas Eve service there. I remember the Christmas Eve service at that little garden thing just being odd because it wasn't a Christmas Eve service. It wasn't Jesus. I think it was just kind of like talking about all these different gods and like, what's all this about? We did get to go to some funeral, at least one funeral service that was there. And it was like middle of the night. It was like you come late at night, and there were candles around this whole pond. And it was a really big, maybe like 2-acre pond, 2 or 3 acre pond. And Ma would get into this boat with the ashes of the person who had passed away, and she would go out onto the boat, and everybody would like surround the lake. All these hundreds of people would just surround this lake, and lots of chanting. I think there were a couple people on the boat with her, and it was just some ceremony of spreading their ashes in this pond, but we just felt really weirded out by it. We didn't understand it. I don't ever remember saying, what might God think about all this? That just wasn't part of my thinking that I remember. But we just felt like it was really weird, and we were just kind of skating by, didn't want to get caught, that we didn't actually go along with this, whatever it was. I don't know that I thought that it was dark. I thought that it was weird. There was always this, you can come and do this, but you're not really one of us. You're not allowed to live here. You're not allowed to go to our schools. You can be friends with some people, but like you have to leave at this time. It was very structured. It didn't seem like they were genuinely loving and trying to take care of us. It seemed like they would let us eat food, but we had to go to this thing. But I didn't really feel genuinely loved by anybody there. My brother and I, again, young and I think just trying to make the best of our situation, never really took it too seriously. But we lived in Florida for a year and a half, and my mom never came back. And there was no explanation as to why she left. So this was all of 4th grade for me and half of 5th grade. And it deeply, deeply hurt me. That was abandonment to the core. I think not only because she left, but because she never explained it. We would talk to her maybe once a month on the phone, and she would talk about how great her new house is with this guy, and I've got a 2-car garage, and the schools over here are lovely. And we would just get off the phone like, why aren't we there? Why are we still out here? So that really started just a deep feeling of abandonment and loss. And how could my mom not love me enough to take us with her? If she left because she didn't like it here, why wouldn't she take us with her? And I carried that hurt. I was heartbroken. I missed my mom, like 9, 10-year-old girl. She needs her mom.
At last, after 18 months away, their mom flew back to Florida to see her kids for Christmas, and a while later, the 2 kids moved back to California to live with their mom and her new boyfriend, Steven, whom she had met through an online spirituality group. But while Meriann may have hoped that rejoining her mom would bring stability into her life, she would encounter the very opposite.
Steven was getting abusive toward my mom, but he was the rescuer. He provided this house for us to be in and this stability, it seemed. And so, again, I think my mom was doing what she thought was best and just staying there with him. I don't remember it being often. I just remember every once in a while hearing he would, hit her and yell at her, and there'd be like a thud against the wall or, something like that. But she would just say, "Oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And my brother, who was in 8th grade, "Mom, do you want me to beat him up? Like, do you want me to?" Like, he was trying to be protective over her, but he was a skinny 8th grade boy. And she said, "Oh, no, honey, no, because Stephen was a boxer at Berkeley and you don't want to fight him." But again, my brother and I, trying to just make it through that time, would just laugh to ourselves upstairs. And Stephen would make this weird face when he was like doing this drug, and his eyes would roll back in his head, and he would like roll his head around and like hum and make these weird noises. And so my brother and I had a really good impression of him all through those years, just to, make fun of him and make light of a situation that was obviously not like anybody that we knew. We're like, well, what are we going to do? We're just, let's laugh our way through it. At one point, Stephen had Mike, my brother, and I down in his office, and he had these glass pipes made out of, like, in science class, like those little tubes. But he would heat them up and hand blow them to blow up the end into like this bulb to turn them into this pipe that he would use. And these pipes were everywhere in the house, everywhere. And so at one point he had my brother and I making these pipes for him. "Hey, this is how you do it." I think it was just one time. It wasn't like a sweatshop where we did it all the time. But at one time he said, "Okay, you get this really hot and then you blow it." But it was like glass blowing. So we were kind of like, "Oh, this is cool," whatever. But so we learned how to hand blow these little pipes. That was a little odd for a 6th grade girl to do. And again, there were parts of this time in our life where we would go to these other houses that were clearly drug houses, drug dealers or friends that just also did drugs. And my mom would bring my brother and I with her. And it was okay, you guys either hang out in the car or in the house. And this one house had this ping pong table in this one room. My mom would just say, "Oh, just hang out in this room. We'll be back in a bit." And they were somewhere else in the house. I don't think they left. I think they were there. But my brother and I never dared to leave the room because we didn't know who lived there. It was clearly something shady was going on. And my brother and I just had a blast playing ping pong. We knew that there was some really scary stuff going on in that house. And we were okay as long as nobody came in the room and we never left the room. That was kind of how I felt. And as long as I was with my brother. If I was alone, I don't know. I can't imagine the fear I would have had. But my brother and I, obviously, you can imagine going through all this together, grew very close. And so him being 2 years older, he stepped into like the protecting role. And, at home, it was just kind of, she tried to not make it obvious in front of us, but we would like walk by the hallway and like see her in the room doing drugs on that pipe. And then at one point, I was in the car with my mom, and I remember looking at this glass pipe, and I was like, "How does that even work?" And she goes, "Well, I'll show you." So as she's driving, she put her knee up to hold the steering wheel, and she took a hit on this pipe. And it got really smoky in the car, just really smoky. And I was like, "We're on the freeway. That is not what I expected you to do. This can't be right." But I just kind of kept quiet, probably cracked the window, I don't know. But it just got really, really smoky.
Only years later would Meriann learn that the drugs her mom and Stephen were using around them as kids was meth. And yes, Meriann and her brother spent countless hours playing ping pong inside a meth house. But that wasn't the only problem. Something else was awry, but this time it was Meriann's heart, literally.
I actually found out that I needed to have open heart surgery. So I went in to the doctor, they found a murmur, and turned out that I had what's called an atrium septal defect. There's a hole in the wall between my 2 atriums and my heart, and I had to have surgery within a few months, and that was going to give me a whole lot more energy and, all these wonderful things. So the day we found that out, I was still living at this place with my mom and Stephen, and I went home, and Again, my mom didn't really explain anything to us. It wasn't let's sit down and talk about this. And, the cardiologist that we met with gave us two options for surgery at the time. One option was like the tried and true way, just go straight in for open heart surgery. They cut through the chest. The other option was a newer device that had come out about 5 years prior to that. So this was in 1998 in California. And it was a little like two umbrella valve that they could go up through the artery in my leg and basically put these two umbrella clasps on either side of the hole. And then my heart would basically grow around it. And that would, it's less invasive, but there's the risk that your body could reject it. They're not cutting open your chest. So it's, maybe less risk of infection. So they left us with this decision and they said, okay, take your time, think about it. When you decide, then we can schedule surgery and move on. So we drive home, no conversation. My world is rocked that just the idea of having surgery and them cutting me open and that my heart is like broken and not working. And they said, if we don't fix it, you're likely to have a heart attack or stroke by the time you're 16. So this bomb got dropped and no conversation from my mom, nothing encouraging. I'm sure she was dealing with it in her own way, but I was rocked. So we go back to that neighborhood where we lived with Steven. I remember walking around the neighborhood. I remember just saying, I need to go for a walk. And walking around the neighborhood, and it was summer in Concord, so it was probably over 100 degrees. I remember walking through this neighborhood, and there was this little uphill part, and I remember just looking up at the sky and just having this thought of like, is there a God up there that could comfort me, that knows what I'm going through, and that could be with me through this? And so it was this feeling of, I feel so lonely. We live about an hour and a half away from my dad. My mom is checked out most of the time. And when she's not, she doesn't want to talk to me. And that was really, really hard. So it was at that time that I remember, well, maybe if I had those beads from Kashi, maybe I could get those beads. Maybe I could like make a bead thing. Like it was just this, maybe I could get like a Catholic Bible or a rosary or something, which again, I never had nobody really taught me how to use any of those things, but I started to be curious about maybe these things could help fix this feeling in my heart of there has to be something more to this.
That day eventually passed, and Meriann's open heart surgery was scheduled. She never got a Bible or the mystical beads from Kashi Ranch, but the surgery and recovery went without a hitch. But it still didn't resolve her insecurities about belonging, acceptance, or performance. And those doubts would come back to bite her, which you'll hear about right after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. Meriann Sanford had spent some of her childhood growing up on the fringes of a cult. She wasn't specifically religious, but neither was she openly hostile. Her mom was living with an abusive meth addict, and Meriann was exposed to drugs constantly. Finally, the situation became so toxic that Meriann and her brother were sent away and bounced around the homes of their adult siblings and other relatives. By the time Meriann was 14 years old, she had lived in 24 different places, and she was desperate to find friends and just fit in.
With all the moving, I would end up falling into whatever crowd was the first friend that I had met at that school. So I became really good at just being the new girl at a school. I was a new kid a lot growing up. And so whoever was the first person that was nice to me, that was my friend. And that was my whole new identity. So if they were nerdy, I was nerdy. If they were athletic, I'm already athletic. Great, I'm in the athletic kids. But in high school, that kind of got me into some, first person that was nice to me was somebody on the bus that was smoking pot and lying to their parents and sneaking out with boys and all of that. So my high school years were this really dishonest blend of, at school, I had really good grades. And I was the teacher's pet, and I really wanted validation from my teachers. I wanted them to look at me and say, good job. On one half, I was a great student. I was a student athlete. I had swam and did volleyball and very athletic and strong. And as far as my teachers knew and, my family, for the most part, that's who I was. But then I also had this whole other side that was smoking pot and going to parties and dating and messing around with guys that started when I was like 15. And again, because I had moved around so regularly, there was not enough structure. I could get away with anything. But I didn't really want to push that limit too much because I really did want validation from people. And if somebody that I loved found out that I was doing those things, I think it would have crushed me to the core. So I just kind of got really good at, I can do this and have this kind of secret life where I'm feeling like I'm getting love from these people that clearly don't care about me and, these boys and these guys. And then I can go to this swim meet and get first place and get these medals and trophies and be the babysitter that my sister would recommend to all of her friends because I was the good kid. And I felt for a while during that time that I had the option to go either way. Everybody kind of knows there were the kids that had, rough childhoods, and that led them into a really dark place, just a really hard life. They fell into drugs, they fell into homelessness or jail or prison. And it would not have been hard for me to go that route. I think what I would have explained it as is I wanted people to love me so much that I didn't want to get in trouble. Like I didn't want people to be disappointed in me. That built into this pride of, look what I went through, and I'm not messed up that bad. I'm relatively good. And my family they always said, what we want to do is just be responsibly irresponsible. If you're going to drink, just make sure you're not driving. Get somebody else to drive you. If you're going to go to a party at a girlfriend's house and there's drinking and drugs, don't get in the car with anybody. Arrange what you're going to stay there overnight ahead of time. So this is what was praised in my family, was to be responsibly irresponsible. And that was my mantra. And I lived it very well all the way up into my mid-20s. I ended up being a swim coach in my early 20s because I swam, growing up. We were on a swim team. I ended up being head coach of this club team of over 100 people. And there was one family that they were like family to me. And they were Christian, very sweet, homeschooling family, very sweet. All 4 of the kids came and they were on this swim team. And the mom and the dad, they would always just kind of say, oh, we're praying for you. They invited me to church one time. I went with them to church for Christmas Eve. And I was so nervous. And I asked my mom, like, what are the rules at this church? Because everywhere I'd been, there are rules. You can't eat the wafer thing unless you do this. And I said, Mom, if they do something, what am I allowed to do? She goes, honey, you're Catholic. You did First Communion. You're allowed to do anything. You have the free pass. So if they do anything, you can do it. And I said, okay, good, because I didn't want to look like a fool, whatever. And it was just what I would now call a normal, lovely Christmas Eve service with worship music and songs about Jesus's birth. And it was lovely. And I remember getting teary-eyed and it was wonderful. But I just felt so loved that this family invited me to it. But I didn't even understand it. They didn't really push anything on me. It was just, come to church with us. Over those years, if I was sick, they would bring me meals, like drop it off on my porch. And I was just so embarrassed that they saw my ashtrays. There were empty beer bottles. It was like a frat house porch. Again, my personal life was so very different from my responsible swim coach life, where I was a mentor to teenage girls. And, I was just really good at keeping those two things separately. I kind of always assumed that this party phase would be temporary while I'm young, and then I would settle down and be soccer mom of the year. I would be responsibly irresponsible while still thinking that I'm a great person. If you had asked me then, are you going to go to heaven? Absolutely. I didn't murder anybody. I do these drugs, but I don't do those drugs. I've been with these men, but not as many as that person's been with. And so it was always just this comparison thing.
When Meriann turned 24, some friends threw her a party at a bar. And that night, she met a military veteran recently returned from Iraq named Dave, who had grown up in the church but had walked away from Christianity. Dave and Meriann hit it off right away, and within a matter of just months, were making plans to get married.
And as soon as he proposed, out of the woodwork, which seemed like it, were all of these women that were friends with Dave's mother, who had passed away 4 years before I met him. And as soon as they heard that Dave had proposed to somebody, they just popped out of nowhere and said, I want to meet you. We want to throw you a bridal shower. I want to take you to church with me. I want to introduce you to my daughter. I mean, they just came around me, about a dozen women. So these women were in a prayer group with Dave's mom. Dave's mom had come to faith when Dave was about 3 years old. And she was an incredible woman of God. Everything I've heard about her, she was the prayer warrior that everybody wants praying for them. So she had passed away from breast cancer 4 years before I met Dave. And what I found out when all these women started taking this incredible interest in me was that on her deathbed, she invited this prayer group over and she washed their feet and made them promise that they would continue to look after her 2 kids, Dave and his sister, and their future spouses and their future grandkids if the Lord would bless them with that. And so she said, please be the mother-in-law for me if I'm not going to be there. So she put this on all 12 of these women. 4 years later, Dave proposes to me, and they just started popping out. And they loved me so deeply that it was unique to anything that I had experienced in all of my feeling like I'm a people person. I know people. When you move around a lot and all these people kind of talk with you, I got really good at discerning, is this person genuine? Is this person not? Do they care about me? Are they a real friend? Are they just whatever it was. And I'd never felt that way before, ever. And these are from women that I was like, what was your name again? Like, I really took me by surprise. They invited me into their homes and they prayed with me and they would read scripture to me that I just felt so loved. And then I started noticing this common thread between these women. They all spoke about Jesus. And they would invite us to these sunrise Easter services. And even then, Dave and I would leave and we're like, okay, they're all so nice. They're so nice and genuine. But I think they drank the Kool-Aid. Like, they really think that this is real. But they were so genuine and kind. And then their daughters would, come back home for vacation and I would see them interact with their daughters. And it was the same way they interacted with me. So it wasn't this, I'm only nice to you, but I'm really different with my own daughter, with my own children. I mean, they treated me the same way. And so I had this kind of that same, if they really knew me, then they wouldn't love me this way. Because living that double life, they only heard about the fun, positive stuff. They didn't know that 2 years earlier, I was the party girl and going to bars and all this stuff. And so I really just had this feeling the other shoe's going to drop and I'm going to get found out and this whole thing's going to get ruined. Because if they really knew me, there's no way they could love me this deeply. One of them invited me to her small group one night, and her and her husband, they drove us there. And she shared her testimony in this small group. And there may be a dozen people in this small group in this living room. And I was blown away because she shared about in college she had an abortion. She shared about some other very private things that I almost wanted to elbow her and say, you're not supposed to say those things out loud, because I was so good at keeping private life separate from what I want people to see life. So I'm listening to her share these things. I know all these people go to church. They all say they love Jesus and they serve God. And I heard her say, this testimony, and then I look around the room and I'm waiting for them to banish her. What I would imagine would have happened back at Kashi. If you stepped out of line, you're just done and out. And they were so warm and welcoming to her and loved her in a way that I had never seen. So I couldn't have predicted that night in a million years how it went. So that is festering in my brain that night, and how they all just treated each other, especially in that vulnerable moment. It was so common, this thread that came from them. It seemed so obvious that it wasn't them that was loving me, because they all had the same thing for me. So it became clearer and clearer that it was God's love for me working through these ladies. And what they would say when I said, oh, you're just being so kind. Thank you for being so sweet to me. Thank you for being patient with me. And they said, I love Jesus. These ladies threw a bridal shower for us. They helped us plan the wedding. One of the women in the small group, in the pro group, her husband was a really great speaker and he was a wedding officiant. Dave said, I think I want him to do the wedding. And so we called them, hey, will you perform the ceremony for us? And he said, yeah, but I want to meet with you for 6 weeks beforehand. And we went, oh no. Because again, we were not believers. We were already living together. So we said, okay, we're getting a free officiant out of the deal. Let's just go for it. So we went and we met with them maybe 4 or 5 times. And sometimes we met together. And sometimes it would be, I would meet with the wife, her name's Carol, and Dave would meet the husband. And one of these times, Carol sat down next to me with a Bible, and she was so sweet, and she just sat right close hip to hip with me. And she might have even been holding my hand. I mean, she just had this love for me as though I was one of her daughters. And she read this scripture to me, and I could tell that she had planned and prayed about and thought about which scriptures to read to me. And they were bookmarked, and she would read one and look at me, just hoping that it would land and stick and connect. And all I felt was how much love she had for me. But I had no idea what she said. It wasn't like she read something about Jesus and I said, okay, that's great, but I don't believe it. I didn't understand it and then reject it. I didn't even understand it. But I just felt so loved. And so I just grabbed her by the hands and I just said, thank you. And I had tears in my eyes because she just loved me. And in my mind, I said, oh, does she think I get the scripture? Whatever, just keep smiling. Like it was, again, if they really know that I have no idea what this is, the whole thing is just going to be done. And so we go through, the wedding happens, and Casey, the husband, wrote this incredible sermon that was completely weaved with the gospel through and through. I mean, it was beautiful. I didn't hear a single word of it in my own wedding. I didn't hear a single word about Jesus. I heard he made mention of Dave's mother, who loved Jesus, and she was a Texas girl, so I had yellow roses in my hair for Yellow Rose of Texas to honor Dave's mom. I remember that. But the entire ceremony was about Jesus, and I didn't hear it. I was there. I was paying attention to make sure I wasn't being forced to promise something that I didn't want to actually promise, but I didn't hear any of that.
Meriann was so excited to be married, and these dozen women who had surrounded and welcomed her were a mystery, but she was grateful for them. Yet while Meriann had been exposed to the gospel so many times by now, point blank, it still didn't resonate for her. But God's good timing was just around the corner. More on that after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. Meriann Sanford had just married her husband Dave, and they were still living in California. A dozen women who had belonged to a prayer group with Dave's mom before she passed away had gently pursued Meriann for the better part of a year, sharing the gospel with her overtly through their words or subtly through their actions. But it had all passed over Meriann's head. But God wouldn't let these women give up now.
The same woman, Carol, that read that scripture to me, and I pretended to know, and I just said, thank you. She said, hey, the prayer group and I, we have a gift for you. Can I meet you at a coffee shop? Sure. So this was maybe 3 weeks after the wedding. So she gave me a Bible, and it had my name, embossed in the front, which I thought was the bee's knees. I was like, oh my goodness, this is really fancy stuff to have my name on the Bible. And just on the inside, it just said, to Meriann from the prayer group. And I just said, oh, thank you so much. And she said, and with this, there's this church plant that I think you guys won't find too churchy. I think you guys should try it out. And I went, oh, okay. Thank you so much. My same smile and just trying to be gracious and have good manners and just say thank you. I mentioned it to Dave, and, we had talked about kids. We had talked about when we have kids, I think we should go to church because it's going to teach good morals to our children. Maybe the church in general can teach some good morals to my children because that clearly won't be my responsibility. That's what a church does. That was my understanding. I don't know what kind of church. I assumed to be Catholic church because that's the only church I had really known. But I think when we have kids, we should start going to church. Let's try this now just to see. Maybe we'll pick a church ahead of time. Dave said, okay, yeah, let's go try a church. And I said, well, first of all, we need to go to a Catholic church because that's what church is. And he said, okay, where's the Catholic church in town? And just went to the Catholic church that was in town. And it was, somewhat familiar to me. You stand up, you sit down, you say this when he says this. And so we left, and I was like, oh, that was good. I think we did good. And Dave said, did you understand anything that the guy said? And I said, no, but it's okay. Like, we did good. That felt good. I think this is what I want to do. And he's like, that was ridiculous. We didn't understand a word of it. Why on earth would we do that? I was like, That's what church is. You don't need to get anything out of it. It's not a personal thing. You just go and you just go. You dress nice and you go. That's good morals for your kids. That was it. And Dave said, okay. Carol said, hey, go try at this church. So we go to this other one. There were 40, 50 people. It was just a small, like one of the first weeks that this church had planted. And it was like back and forth, almost like Q&A with the crowd. Like, what do you think about this? It was so odd to me. And we walked out and in my head, I was like, that is the most ridiculous, childish thing. How can they call that church? Because you go to Catholic church and there's all the hubbub, like that's church. And I didn't say anything. And I'm expecting Dave to be like, that was ridiculous. They drank the Kool-Aid. Nope, we're not doing this. And we weren't even stepping off the curb to the parking lot yet. We were just out the front door. And I said, well, what do you think? Expecting some snarky answer. And he goes, I actually really liked it. And I went, what? There was like whiteboards and it was modern and weird. It didn't feel like what church was supposed to feel like. There weren't all these rules and people were laid back and casual and friendly and, met us and shook our hands. And it wasn't this, you just kind of stay in your own lane and go to church and be a good person and then you leave, but you don't talk to anybody. It was just so different. So he shockingly loved it. I was confused and didn't think it was real church. But then immediately they invited us to a small group, that church. They said, hey, come to this small group. We're starting one in 2 weeks. We're starting a new session of small group in this person's house. It's got believers and non-believers. We think y'all should come. We said, will there be food there? They said, yes, there's food. We're going. And that very first night, they handed out this packet. And the packet on the front page had these 2 columns. And one column was Jesus and Christianity and what that means. And then it had other religions and what that meant and what that means. And in other religions, it was very familiar to me. It was like, you have to earn it. You have to act a certain way. There's lots of guilt involved. You're trying to work to earn your salvation. You have to live up to your end to the bargain is basically what all these bullets alluded to in this column over here. And I was like, yep, that's what church is supposed to be in my mind. And then this other column was Jesus and Christianity. And it said, it's a free gift and you can't earn it. And he already did it for you. You can't really pay him back. It's not on you. There's nothing you can do to earn it. And I was shocked. I had never heard that before. And I just stayed on that page, and it's all the couples on the couch and everybody's talking and I'm not talking at all. Everybody's kind of going around, but I am just fixated on that page. And everybody's, okay, now turn to page 2. Now it's this. And I couldn't tell you what the rest of the packet was. I was just fixated on that it's a free gift that you can't earn. And he already did it for you because of all of your sin that you did. Rest of the night happens. And I didn't ask a question. I didn't because again, if they knew that I really didn't understand this, I was going to be caught. So I was like, just keep all those questions to yourself. So we're in the car driving home and I'm looking out the window and I was almost mad. I was shocked, but I was almost mad. And I turned to Dave and I said, how come nobody told me about this? How come nobody told me about Jesus? That it's free, that it was already done. Nobody told me this. And I don't even remember what Dave's response was because I was probably just in shock and rambling at how could I be 25 years old and everybody that I had met and all the places that I had traveled and nobody told me about Jesus. How can that be possible? That this is it, like this is the answer. And I just felt so free. I still had a lot of questions, and I don't even know that I would say that I came fully to faith that night, but I was so personally shocked and offended that night that nobody had told me about Jesus. We keep going to the small group. I'm seeing them pray for another. I'm seeing what it looks like to live in Christian community, and somebody got laid off at a job, and they're praying for them, and there's problems in the they're just living intentionally together with the gospel in the middle of it. So I'm kind of picking up on this. Okay, this happens, and then they pray and they talk about, I'm learning about God, that he's all-knowing and he knows our thoughts and he loves us, and Jesus was sent to die for our sins and he saved us. So I'm kind of picking all this up, and the A student in me is like, okay, learn it. And on paper, I was getting it. Few months are going by, and I still wouldn't say that I believed, but I'm learning it. And so all the head knowledge is kind of there, but I still didn't feel comfortable saying Jesus out loud. So during this time, Dave and I were trying to start a family, and months go by, and I'm not pregnant, and we're a little upset. So one night, we got back from this small group that we were going to, and I had asked Dave, I said, I think we should pray about getting pregnant. And it was really awkward and vulnerable for me to even suggest that, because remember, not long before, we were like, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. So I was really nervous that if I suggested that I had any belief in this, that Dave would turn on me almost and think, okay, she's lost it. That's not what I signed up for. I don't want to go down that route. Even though we were going to small groups and stuff, but that was just the insecurity in me that was really nervous and scared to suggest it. So he said, okay. We sat up in bed and we prayed out loud together. And it was the most vulnerable, awkward thing to pray out loud with my spouse, which should not be, because we did things so backwards, because we were physically intimate before we were emotionally, spiritually intimate. It should not be that way. But it was just really, really hard. Just vulnerable. And so I prayed and I said, God, they say that you know our thoughts and you know our hearts. So you must know that we really want to be parents and we want to have a child. Would you please bless us with a child if and when you think we're ready? This is what I said out loud. Immediately in my head goes, why did you say if? Why did you say if? Don't hand that over. You're going to have a child. You may have to wait, but you're going to be a mom. You're going to have a child. Don't say if. But I didn't take it back. I just, that was in my head. And I was just like, well, too late. I already said it, can't take it back from God, which is funny, even though I said, you know our thoughts. And then I'm having this inner dialogue of take it back. Why would you hand that over? But I was almost like beating myself up or just really surprised in myself that I said if. Anyway, ended the prayer. Thank you, God, and went to bed. And the next morning, woke up, went and took a pregnancy test, and it was positive. And I came back and woke up Dave and told him, and he's like, oh, we prayed last night. And I said, we did. And I said, if I handed it over, meaning if he didn't want to give us kids at all, he wouldn't have. And Dave was like, yeah, I wondered about that. Like, why did you do that? I was like, it doesn't matter. It's positive. It's fine. And so that would be the day that I would definitively say that I came to faith. And it was that day forward that I walked in faith of, I don't understand what's going on, but he's real and he cares for me.
From that point onward, Meriann and Dave would never be the same. Life had a new meaning to it, a purpose to be lived out. There was a God, and he cared specifically for individuals like them.
First few months of coming to faith, we share it with our small group. They're ecstatic. They had a birthday cake for Dave saying, happy birthday, welcome back, because they had seen him as a kid going to church and then strayed. And, they were friends with his mom. And so they're seeing him come back to faith. It was just this warm welcome, beautiful, beautiful community that surrounded us. And they were the new family. It was wonderful. So in the few months that followed that, the Lord, in his kindness, remembering that I was shocked and appalled and offended that nobody told me about Jesus, the Lord brought me back to these very vivid memories of one of the meth houses, that he protected us there, that there was something, he didn't tell me what, but he said, when you were playing ping pong, I was there and I protected you from whatever was going on over there. I was there with you. That day you were walking in your neighborhood after your heart surgery consultation and you looked up to the sky. Do you remember you walked by this color car? All the details. He brought me right, and there was like one every few weeks over about 4-month period. Remember the family in Santa Cruz on their swim team that brought you to church and they used to bring you meals? Well, they were praying for you on your doorstep. They prayed for you a bunch and you were there and said thank you. There were all of these reminders, and even, at Kashi, at the ranch, the Lord protected us there. And he protected our minds and he protected our bodies and all of it. Protected me from, like I said, I could have easily taken a different path in my life. of the friends that I was hanging out with. I could have not chose to have the double life. I could have said, who cares what people think about? And I could have gone this way. And so the gift that the Lord gave me in those first few months was the descriptive details and bringing me back to these memories of how people had shared with me. I was reminded of Carol, who shared the scriptures with me. I said, oh, she did share it with me just a couple months ago. And here I am offended that nobody told me. So all these people, they did share the good news of Jesus with me. They absolutely shared it with me. The end of that 4-ish months of me remembering all these wonderful people that had planted the gospel in my heart throughout my life, we had finally gotten our wedding video back from our good friend that had filmed our wedding. It was 1 year later from the wedding. And so for our 1-year anniversary, we got to watch the wedding video. And I got to see, and for the first time I heard my wedding ceremony, it was all about Jesus. The entire thing was about Jesus. So what I think I've come to learn about coming to faith is I now understand that it is not in the power of any one person to make somebody else to believe, to convince them to believe, to love them enough or force them to go to ashram. You can't force anybody to believe in Jesus, and faith comes through God alone. What I thought was a story of my life that would fill me with pride because I survived it and it didn't crush me completely. It's really sweet to see that the true hero of all of this is God himself. And it's not Dave's mom, as sweet as she is, and the part that she played in that. It's not Dave for saying, I actually kind of liked that church, or, whatever it was. God's the true hero of all of it. And it's helped me to be more patient now in sharing the gospel with others, just because it still feels so recent. It's been 10, 13 years now since I came to faith, but it still feels so recent that if we're sharing with somebody and I see their reaction, I'm like, oh, that's okay. I know exactly what they're thinking, and it's all right. If the Lord's working in them, the Lord's working in them, and we're not going to rush it a day sooner than it has to be. So we just kind of plant the seeds and love and encourage people and, point them to Jesus and tell them about how God worked in my life, because they can't say, no, that's not true. I can say, no, this is, God protected me and he showed me this. And he even reminded me of things that I didn't want to remember, So I'm just so grateful at how the Lord has gifted that to me and then allowed me to see that it's a gift from him.
Meriann, thank you for coming and sharing.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things in Meriann's testimony that held my attention were the dozen women who continued to reach out to Meriann faithfully, even when their message was falling on deaf ears. Meriann didn't understand what they were saying, but she could still feel the genuine love that these women had for her. It wasn't fake, it wasn't flashy, it was simply real. And God used those simple acts of loving kindness to finally open Meriann's eyes to the good news of salvation, but only when he was ready to move in Meriann's heart and not before then. It reminds me of Matthew 13, verses 15 and 16, when Jesus says, "For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear." If you know someone in your life who God is calling you to reach out to, but they don't seem to be responding the way you'd like them to, don't give up. God will move in their hearts in his perfect time. All he needs you to do is simply be obedient to the calling he's given you. Today, Meriann and her husband own and operate Sanford Sourdough Bakery in Austin, Texas. You can learn more at sanfordbakery.com. And if you know someone who would be encouraged by Meriann's testimony, please send this to them. It's episode number 97 with Meriann Sanford. Creating stories like these take time. We have to record the original interview, and then we have countless rounds of editing and revisions and adding music and sound effects and narration and mixing and mastering, and all told, a single episode can take upwards of 80 hours to produce. We're a small team, but we are so excited to bring these stories to life. But we need your help. If you enjoy these stories and want to help us continue creating more stories just like Meriann's, then consider joining Compelled as a monthly partner. And as our way of thanks, we'll give you access to all of our behind-the-scenes interviews with over 100 hours of additional interview content that we never had time to publish, including an extra hour of stories from Meriann's original interview. You'll also get access to all of our new episodes 1 week early without ads. There's no set price. We simply leave that up to you however you feel led. Just choose the monthly amount that makes sense for you. And by doing that, you're helping us create new episodes of Compelled. To join as a monthly partner or to make a one-time donation, just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate. Special thanks to my buddy Gabriel Affont, who helped me film Meriann's testimony. This was one of the first of 20 Compelled interviews we filmed back-to-back in January. It was physically exhausting and emotionally demanding, but Gabriel kept it professional every moment and was exactly the kind of guy I like to bring with me on set. Gabriel and his wife Rachel own Keylight Marketing, which helps mid-sized companies just like Compelled craft an online presence that they're proud of. They specialize in content creation, social media, photography, and of course, video production. They've been a blessing to Compelled, and they'd love to bless you as well. If you have marketing needs, then please visit them at keylightmarketing.com. Today's episode was edited by Will Jackson, mixing and mastering by Sonomorphic, and our associate producer is my beautiful wife, Sarah Hastings. I'm your host, Paul Hastings, and you've been listening to Compelled. We'll be back next time with another compelling story. We'll see you then.